I recognized my wife's laugh on my new boss's private baby monitor. It was a sound so familiar, so intrinsically hers, that it sliced through the stale air of Mark's office like a shard of ice. My own breath hitched, catching somewhere in my chest, a physical manifestation of the disbelief that was already clawing its way up my throat. I'd been leaning back in the plush leather chair, trying to project an image of calm competence, nodding along to Mark's droning explanation of Q3 projections when it happened. The faint, tinny sound seeping from the closed door of his private executive suite. At first, I dismissed it. The office was a big building, lots of people, lots of weird noises. But then it came again, a distinct giggle, a breathy little sound that was as unique as a fingerprint. And that's when it hit me. Before I go any further, seriously, if you're finding this story gripping, if you're already hooked, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Give this a like. Share it with someone who loves a good, raw story. And leave a comment below. I really want to know what you think is going to happen next. Your engagement helps keep these stories coming. Okay, back to it. The giggle was followed by a low murmur, then another burst of laughter, higher this time, almost a squeal. It was a sound I knew better than the rhythm of my own heart. It was Sarah, my Sarah, the woman I'd built my life with, the woman who was supposedly home, nestled on the couch with a prenatal yoga DVD, waiting for me to get back from this late-night meeting. The sweat started to bead on my forehead, a cold, clammy film that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Mark, oblivious, was still talking about synergistic partnerships and leveraging our core competencies. I could feel my focus fraying, dissolving into 1,000 tiny pieces. My gaze kept drifting to that door, a dark, imposing rectangle that suddenly felt like the gateway to some surreal nightmare. I tried to compartmentalize. That's what I was good at, or at least that's what I told myself I was good at. Work was work, home was home. But this was a fundamental breach of that separation. The sound wasn't just like Sarah's laugh, it was Sarah's laugh. I'd spent years cataloging every nuance of it. The playful, teasing one that usually preceded a wink, the full-bellied belly laugh when something genuinely tickled her, the soft, contented chuckle when we were curled up watching a movie. This was a new variation, something light and unrestrained, the kind of sound that belonged to pure, unadulterated joy, and it was coming from behind Mark's door. Mark, my new boss, the guy who'd been nothing but solicitous since he'd taken over the company 6 months ago. He was younger than me, sharp, ambitious, with a way of making everyone feel both important and slightly out of their depth.
He'd invited me out for drinks a few times, always with his wife Emily, a quiet, elegant woman who always seemed to be smiling politely. I cleared my throat, trying to regain my composure. "Right, Q3 projections," I said, my voice sounding a little too loud, a little too strained. "Yes, the synergy, it's crucial." Mark nodded, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, flicked towards me for a second. Did he notice? Did he see the tremor in my hand as I reached for my water glass? I took a sip, the cool liquid doing nothing to quell the sudden dryness in my mouth. The laughter from behind the door subsided, replaced by the indistinct murmur of voices. A man's voice, deep, authoritative. Mark's voice? It was hard to tell over the thrumming in my ears. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. This was insane. I was letting my imagination run wild. Sarah was home. She was pregnant, probably exhausted, definitely not here, wherever here was. But the sound, it was a phantom limb, a constant ache that refused to be ignored. My mind started to churn, replaying fragments of conversations, moments that now seemed to shimmer with a new, sinister light. Sarah had been acting different lately. Not drastically, not in a way that screamed infidelity, more subtle. A new guardedness, a tendency to change the subject when I asked about her day. She'd been spending more time on her phone, her thumb flying across the screen with a speed I hadn't seen before. I'd attributed it to pregnancy hormones, to the stress of preparing for the baby. I'd been so focused on being the supportive husband, the provider, the rock. I told myself it was all normal, the anxieties of impending parenthood. But now that laugh echoed in the hollow spaces of my doubt. Mark finally finished his spiel, leaning back in his chair. "So, what do you think? Any initial thoughts, John?" His gaze was direct, unwavering. I forced myself to meet it. "It's a lot to digest, Mark," I said, my voice still a little rough. "I'll need some time to process the numbers." I gestured vaguely at the spreadsheets spread across his desk. My mind, however, was miles away, replaying the sound, trying to pin down the exact quality of that joy. It was a sound of pure, uninhibited delight, the kind of sound a person makes when they're utterly comfortable, utterly at ease with someone they trust implicitly. And that someone, I was starting to suspect, was not me. Of course," Mark said, a hint of patronizing understanding in his tone. "Take your time. We're a team, John. We'll get there." He stood up, extending a hand. I took it, the handshake firm, almost too firm. I felt the lingering warmth of his skin, the slight calluses on his palm. It was the hand of a man who, presumably, lived a life of privilege, a life far removed from the everyday struggles of most people, a life where private baby monitors were a thing, a life perhaps with children.
And suddenly, the image of Emily, his wife, flashed in my mind. The polite smile, the quiet demeanor. Was she here too? Was this some kind of play date for the executives? The absurdity of it almost made me want to laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice gaining a surprising steadiness, "I'm afraid I'll have to cut this short tonight. Sarah's not feeling well. I need to get home." It was a lie, a clumsy, transparent lie, but it was the only defense I had. I needed to escape, to get back to the quiet normalcy of our apartment, to look Sarah in the eye and see the truth. Mark's smile didn't falter. "Of course, John. Family first. Always." He walked me to the door, his arm lightly brushing my shoulder. The gesture, meant to be supportive, felt like a brand. The walk to my car was a blur. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the suffocating tension of Mark's office. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. The drive home felt like an eternity. Every red light, every slow driver was an agony. My mind raced, constructing scenarios, dismissing them, rebuilding them. The laugh, it kept coming back, a maddening refrain. It was too specific, too deeply ingrained in my subconscious to be a coincidence. Sarah, Mark, the baby monitor. It was a cocktail of impossible elements that were somehow coalescing into a terrifying reality. I pulled into our usual parking spot, the familiar concrete structure of our apartment building looming overhead. The silence in the car was deafening. I sat there for a moment, gathering myself, trying to push down the rising panic. I couldn't go in there with accusations already burning on my tongue. I had to be calm. I had to observe. I had to find proof. The thought sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. Proof of what? Of Sarah's betrayal? Of Mark's involvement? It was too much to comprehend. The apartment was quiet when I opened the door. The low hum of the refrigerator, the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Sarah was asleep on the couch, a half-read book splayed open on her chest. Her pregnant belly rose and fell with each soft breath. She looked peaceful, vulnerable. My heart ached. I knelt beside her, my gaze tracing the gentle curve of her forehead, the slight parting of her lips. The doubt, the suspicion, warred with the overwhelming love I felt for her, the fierce protectiveness that had been my bedrock for 10 years. I gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes, still heavy with sleep, blinked at me, a slow, dawning recognition. "Hey," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. I watched her, searching for any flicker of deception, any hint of the person whose laugh I'd heard earlier. Her expression was soft, a little tired, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Did you have a good evening?" She yawned, stretching a hand towards her belly. "Just watched a movie. Tried to relax. You know how it is." She shifted, the movement bringing her closer to me. I felt a desperate urge to hold her, to bury my face in her hair and convince myself that this was all a figment of my overactive imagination. But the sound, that distinct, uninhibited laugh, was still echoing in the chambers of my mind, a relentless siren song of suspicion. "Everything okay with you?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "You seem a little off." I swallowed, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "Just tired, I guess. Long day." I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. The thought of confronting her, of shattering this fragile peace, was more than I could bear. But the alternative, living with this gnawing uncertainty, this insidious suspicion, felt even worse. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my back stiff, my mind a battlefield. The laughter, it was the only piece of evidence, the only thread connecting the two disparate worlds that had suddenly collided. Mark, my boss, and Sarah, my wife. The implications were too devastating to contemplate, yet they were all I could think about. I looked at her sleeping face, her innocence a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted from the corner of the room, from the sleek, modern baby monitor we'd bought months ago, still sitting on the bookshelf, its tiny blue light blinking innocently. It was a soft, indistinct murmur. And then, as I strained to listen, I heard it again, fainter this time, but undeniably there, a low, satisfied sigh that was so familiar. My own wife's sigh. And with it, a chilling realization began to dawn, a terrifying possibility that I hadn't even considered. What if the laugh wasn't Sarah's to me? What if it was Sarah's, but on Mark's monitor, with Mark's voice, because she was there? And the sigh was the sound of contentment, a contentment I hadn't heard from her in weeks. My blood ran cold. This was just the beginning. I knew it. The real nightmare was about to unfold. The sigh, it was almost imperceptible, a breath caught on the air, yet it resonated within me like a seismic shockwave. It wasn't the sigh of someone merely content. It was the deep, languid exhalation of pure, unadulterated pleasure. And it was coming from the baby monitor. Sarah stirred beside me, murmuring something unintelligible in her sleep. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too deeply, for fear of disturbing the fragile illusion of normalcy she seemed to inhabit. My gaze was fixed on the small plastic device, its blue light pulsing like a malevolent eye. It was supposed to be a comforting presence, a safeguard for our unborn child, a tool for nascent parenthood.
Now it was a conduit to a betrayal so profound, so gut-wrenching, that it threatened to unravel everything I held dear. The murmur from the monitor stopped. Silence descended again, thick and suffocating. I waited, my body a taut coil of apprehension. Had I imagined it? Had the stress, the fear, the sheer impossibility of it all conjured phantom sounds? But the memory of that laugh, the distinct timbre of Sarah's joy, was too vivid, too visceral. And that sigh, it had the same undeniable imprint of her. It was the sound she made when she finally relaxed, when all her defenses melted away, when she felt utterly safe and cherished. And the chilling thought that kept circling back was, with whom? I looked at Sarah again. Her face, illuminated by the faint ambient light of the living room, was serene. The gentle swell of her belly, the very embodiment of our shared future, felt like a cruel mockery. The life we had meticulously built, the promises we had whispered, the dreams we had painted onto the canvas of our lives, all of it was now tainted, suspect. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the Sarah I knew, the woman I loved with every fiber of my being, with the phantom presence on that monitor. Was she there? In Mark's office? While I was supposedly having a crucial meeting about Q3 projections? The absurdity of it was crushing. I gently pushed myself up from the couch, careful not to wake Sarah. My legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. I walked towards the bookshelf where the baby monitor sat, its innocent glow a stark contrast to the turmoil it now represented. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The volume was surprisingly loud. The muffled voices were clearer now. A low hum, a murmur of conversation, punctuated by what sounded like soft laughter. Not Sarah's distinct giggle, but a more generalized sound of amusement, of shared amusement. Was there someone else there? Emily? Then I heard it again, faintly, almost buried beneath the other sounds, a distinct, breathy little laugh. It was her, Sarah, my Sarah. The sound was unmistakable, laced with a vulnerability and a joy that was so profoundly her. My grip tightened on the monitor, the plastic digging into my palm. I wanted to smash it, to silence the evidence, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But I couldn't. I had to know. Mark? A woman's voice, soft and melodic, drifted from the monitor. It wasn't Sarah's voice. It was Emily's. My stomach twisted. Emily, Mark's wife. So this was a party? A clandestine rendezvous masquerading as a corporate strategy session? I felt a surge of anger, a hot, white-hot rage that threatened to consume me. How dare they? How dare they use this innocent piece of technology, this symbol of new life, to conduct their sordid affair? Just a moment, darling, Mark's voice replied, smooth and deep. John's just wrapping up, almost done. John, he said my name. He knew I was there. He knew I could hear. Was this a power play? A deliberate taunt? The implications were staggering. He knew about Sarah, he knew about the baby, and he was using it, flaunting it, right in front of me. The sheer audacity, the callous disregard, was beyond anything I could have imagined. Then, another sound, a faint, high-pitched whimper. A baby? A real baby? But Sarah was still pregnant. Our baby wasn't due for months. Unless it wasn't our baby. Unless it was... My mind flashed back to a conversation a few weeks ago. Sarah had been unusually quiet after a doctor's appointment. When I'd pressed her, she'd brushed it off, saying it was just nerves. But now, a new possibility, a horrific scenario, began to take shape. What if she wasn't just pregnant? What if she had given birth? Already? And what if the baby on the monitor wasn't mine? The thought was so alien, so monstrous, that it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked at Sarah, still sleeping soundly on the couch, her face a picture of innocent slumber. Could she be capable of such a monumental deception?
Could she have carried on an affair, gotten pregnant, and hidden it all from me? The sheer scale of the betrayal, the intricate web of lies it would entail was almost too much to process. The laughter from the monitor, Sarah's laugh, resurfaced, fainter this time, almost a phantom echo, but it was there. And with it, the sound of Emily's voice, cooing softly. And then, a tiny, almost inaudible sob, a baby's cry. Not a whimper, but a genuine cry. My blood ran cold. The pieces clicked into place with a sickling finality. Sarah wasn't just pregnant. She had given birth. And the baby on the monitor, the baby whose heartbeat I was listening to, whose cries I could faintly hear, was hers, but not ours. It had to be Mark's. And Emily? Emily was just a pawn, a cover, a willing accomplice in their twisted charade. The thought of Emily, so quiet and seemingly innocent, complicit in this, was almost as devastating as Sarah's betrayal. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I stumbled back, needing air, needing to escape the suffocating reality of that tiny plastic device. I moved towards the window, my hands braced against the cold glass. The city lights blurred before my eyes. The scene in Mark's office, the intimate sounds, Sarah's laughter, it all coalesced into a single, horrifying tableau. They were in his private suite, listening to their baby, sharing a moment of parental joy. A joy that was rightfully mine, a joy that was meant to be shared with Sarah. And I was here, in our apartment, oblivious, heartbroken. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hand shaking. It was a text from Sarah, just a few minutes ago. Love you, can't sleep, thinking of you. The words, meant to be a comfort, now felt like a fresh stab wound. The sheer hypocrisy, the chilling ability to lie so effortlessly, was breathtaking. I wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter something, anything, to break the suffocating silence of my own despair. I looked back at the baby monitor, still sitting on the bookshelf, its blue light blinking insistently. The sounds had faded, replaced by the gentle hum of static. But the memory of Sarah's math, the weight of that sigh, the chilling realization of the baby's heartbeat, it was all seared into my mind. My gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of Sarah and me, taken on our wedding day. We were smiling, our eyes full of hope, of love, of a future we believed was solid, unbreakable. Now that image felt like a cruel joke, a relic from a life that no longer existed. I had to know the truth, all of it, the full, unvarnished, devastating truth. I couldn't live with the gnawing uncertainty, the phantom echoes of betrayals I only half understood. I had to confront her. I had to confront them. But how? How could I possibly face her, this woman who had been my entire world, and ask her if the life we'd built was a lie? How could I face Mark, my boss, and demand answers for his cruel game?
My hand hovered over my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb trembling. Mark. The number felt poisonous. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. Then, with a surge of desperate resolve, I tapped his name. It rang once, twice. My heart hammered against my ribs. John? Mark's voice, smooth as ever, answered. But beneath the veneer of politeness, I could sense a subtle shift, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of apprehension. Mark, I began, my voice rough, uncharacteristically shaky. We need to talk. Now. There was a beat of silence, a charged, pregnant silence that hung in the air between us. John, it's late, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Is everything all right? No, Mark, I said, my voice hardening with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. Everything is not all right, not by a long shot. I could feel Sarah stirring on the couch, her breathing quickening. She was waking up. The moment of reckoning was upon me. I heard you. I heard her. And I know what's going on. Another pause, longer this time. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Then, a low, almost imperceptible sigh escaped Mark's lips on the other end of the line. It was a sigh of resignation, of inevitability, and it was the sound that confirmed my worst fears. He knew I knew. John, Mark finally said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. We need to be very careful. What you think you heard, it's not what it seems. But I knew. I had heard Sarah's laugh. I had heard her sigh. I had heard a baby's cry. And I had heard Mark's deep chuckle, not as a boss, but as a lover. The carefully constructed walls of my life were crumbling, and I was standing in the ruins, bracing myself for whatever came next. The confusion, the pain, the sheer gut-wrenching betrayal were only just beginning to surface, and I had a terrifying feeling that I had only scratched the surface of this deceit. The real damage was yet to be revealed. The silence that following my words stretched, a physical entity filling the space between me and Mark, thick with accusation and the bitter taste of revelation. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me now, a soft rustling of fabric as she shifted on the couch. The baby monitor lay on the bookshelf, a silent witness, its blue light a cold, unblinking stare. The soft static seemed to mock me, a whisper of the secrets it had broadcasted. Mark's silence on the phone was deafening. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that acknowledged guilt without uttering a single word. I held my breath, waiting for his carefully crafted denial,
his smooth deflection. But it never came. Instead, after what felt like an eternity, I heard it again, that subtle, almost imperceptible sigh. It wasn't the sigh of pleasure I'd heard earlier, but one of pure, unadulterated defeat. "John," Mark's voice was barely a whisper, stripped of his usual confidence, its practiced charm. "Complicated?"
My voice cracked, a raw sound ripped from my chest. "You think this is complicated? My wife is carrying my child, or so I thought, and I'm listening to my boss playing house with her, with your baby, while I'm supposed to be discussing quarterly reports? Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it, Mark." The anger was a wildfire now, consuming the shock, the confusion, the disbelief. It burned hot and clean, a visceral reaction to the utter violation of trust. Sarah sat up fully then, her voice hesitant, laced with concern that felt impossibly fake now. "John? What's going on? Who are you talking to?" I didn't look at her. My eyes were glued to the baby monitor, to the pulsing blue light that had become the focal point of my shattered reality. "I'm talking to Mark," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was just telling me how complicated things are. On the phone, Mark cleared his throat. "John, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." "Really?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Because it sounds exactly like what I think. It sounds like my wife is sleeping with my boss. It sounds like you've been using your office, your technology, to conduct an affair and raise a child that I was supposed to believe was mine. It sounds like the last 6 months of my life have been a lie." Sarah gasped, a small, sharp intake of breath. "John, what are you saying? What have you heard?" I finally turned to her then, and the sight of her face, her innocent eyes wide with feigned confusion, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The gentle swell of her belly, once a symbol of our future, now seemed like a grotesque monument to her deception. "I heard you," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I heard you laughing. I heard you sigh. I heard a baby crying. And I heard Mark's voice, not as my boss, but as something else." Her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a gesture that had always signified comfort and protection, but now felt like a desperate attempt to shield her secret. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling. "The monitor, it must be picking up sounds from somewhere else." "Don't," I said, cutting her off. The word was a sharp, brutal command. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not anymore. Not after this. I heard the baby's heartbeat. It wasn't mine. It wasn't ours." The words were like shards of glass in my throat. "Whose baby is it, Sarah?" She looked away, her gaze fixed on the floor. The silence was her confession. The tremor in her hands, the subtle hitch in her breath, were her admission. I could feel the truth settling over me, a suffocating blanket of despair. "John, please," Mark's voice pleaded from the phone. "Let me come over. We can talk about this, all of us." "No," I said, my voice firm. "No more talking. No more explanations. I've heard enough. I've seen enough. And I've felt enough."
I looked at Sarah, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman I loved, but a stranger. Her eyes, once so open and honest, were now guarded, filled with a calculated guilt. "You know," I said, my voice barely audible, "I used to think that love meant knowing all the flaws, all the imperfections, and loving them anyway. I thought that was the strength of it. But this isn't a flaw. This is a betrayal so profound, it's a complete rewriting of our entire existence." She finally looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "John, I never meant for this to happen. It happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, the absurdity of it all hitting me again. An affair with my boss? Getting pregnant with his child? all while telling me you were carrying mine? That doesn't just happen, Sarah. That's a choice, a series of choices. The anger was starting to recede, replaced by a hollow ache that felt far worse. It was the ache of profound loss, of a future that had evaporated into thin air. "I was going to tell you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "After the baby was born, I couldn't find the right time." "The right time?" I laughed again, a broken sound. "When would that have been, Sarah? On the day I was supposed to meet my new nephew? Or perhaps at his christening, with me standing there blissfully unaware?" I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up the baby monitor. I held it in my hand, its smooth plastic cool against my skin. The blue light still pulsed, a small, insistent beacon of their shared intimacy. "This thing," I said, my voice laced with a bitter irony. "This was supposed to be for our baby, to hear our baby's first cries, to feel connected, and instead it became the soundtrack to my own destruction." I looked at Sarah again. Her face was streaked with tears now, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. But even in her distress, I couldn't shake the feeling that some part of her was still calculating, still trying to manage the fallout. "I can't do this, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. "I can't look at you. I can't be in this apartment. I can't even breathe the same air without seeing what you've done." I walked towards the door, my movements deliberate, almost numb. Every step felt heavy, weighted down by the enormity of what had just transpired. "I'm going for a drive," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. I need to figure out what comes next. For me. Because the us you talked about, that us doesn't exist anymore." I opened the door, the cool night air a welcome shock against my skin. Before I stepped out, I paused and looked back at her. She was still sitting there, a solitary figure in the dim light, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The life we had built, the dreams we had shared, were all gone. There was no anger left, no outrage, just a vast, empty space where my heart used to be.
"Goodbye, Sarah," I said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. They were a punctuation mark at the end of a chapter I never wanted to read. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the sudden silence. The hallway was dimly lit, the familiar beige walls now seeming alien and unwelcoming. I walked down the stairs, each step a descent into a new, uncharted territory of my own making. My car was parked on the street, a silent steel beast waiting to carry me away from the wreckage. As I got in, the familiar scent of worn leather and stale coffee felt like a phantom limb, a reminder of a past that was no longer mine. I started the engine, the rumble a low thrum against the quiet of the night. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to drive, to put distance between myself and the life that had imploded behind me. The city lights blurred past the windshield, a kaleidoscope of colors that offered no solace, no direction. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, a whirlwind of guilt, regret, and a pain so deep it felt physical. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? Had I been too consumed by work, too focused on being the provider, the steady rock, that I'd neglected the very foundation of our relationship? The thought of Mark, my colleague, my friend, the man I had shared lunches and late-night brainstorming sessions with, now filled me with a visceral disgust. He had played me, manipulated me, all while sharing my wife. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. I drove for hours, the miles melting away under the hum of the tires. I ended up on a deserted highway, the darkness absolute, the only light coming from my own headlights. I pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under my tires. I killed the engine, and the silence that descended was profound, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. I leaned my head back against the headrest, my eyes closed. The image of Sarah's face, her tears, her whispered confession, replayed in my mind. Was any of it real? Had she ever truly loved me? Or was I just a convenient placeholder, a means to an end?
The questions gnawed at me, relentless and unanswerable. I thought of the baby, my baby, the one I had so eagerly anticipated, the one I had envisioned holding, nurturing, protecting. Now that child was a symbol of everything that had been stolen from me, a testament to a lie that had permeated every corner of my life. A profound sense of loneliness washed over me. I was adrift, cut off from the very people I had thought were my anchors. The future, once a brightly lit path, was now a dark, uncharted abyss. I didn't know how I would ever recover from this, how I would ever trust again, how I would ever find a way to rebuild a life from these shattered pieces. The sky began to lighten in the east, the first hint of dawn painting the horizon in shades of gray and rose. It was a new day, but for me, it felt like the end of everything.
I sat there for a long time, the chill of the pre-dawn air seeping into my bones. There were no answers, no easy solutions, just the stark reality of my loss. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Sarah's name. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I say? What could I possibly say? I deleted her number. Then, I scrolled to Mark's. I hesitated, then deleted his as well. I didn't want to hear their voices, their explanations, their apologies. Not now. Maybe not ever. I started the car again, the engine's roar a small comfort in the vast emptiness. I pulled back onto the highway, heading east, towards the rising sun. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving, to outrun the ghosts of the past, to find a way to exist in a world that had irrevocably changed. The road stretched out before me, long and uncertain, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to truly be alone. The exhale that escaped me was ragged, a whisper of surrender, and a silent vow to survive.